good? No. We're good?
Okay.
So, Operation, excuse me? Project, okay. Operation Overlord was a strategic plan to attack the coastline of Normandy, France, beginning on June 6, 1944. This was an orchestrated effort between Britain and Canada, the United States of America. A section of the coastline of Normandy was chosen as a landing for the Allied forces, with 5 areas parceled out between the British, Canadians, and Americans. The American forces had 2 beaches that they conduct landings on, which nicknamed Utah Beach, which we will focus on today, and Omaha Beach. Hold on, wait, that's just fogging up a little bit. Utah Beach was the last section of the northern French coastline to be added to the Allied plan, with the course of obtaining control of the port of Cherbourg, which is the only area deep enough to allow the unload of troops and supplies at Utah Beach. Utah Beach became a site of many casualties and problems, which made people question, was Utah Beach really worth capturing for the Americans? Can someone clean my glasses? Thank you. Before the actual assault, the 82nd and 101st American Airborne Divisions landed in the pre-dawn hours along the beaches. Numerous paratroopers were lost due to enemy fire and drowning. Thank you so much. But they did succeed at protecting the seaborne attack from the German units that were located in the area. The American soldiers who survived the descent and at the first hours were able to quickly create points of control inland for the troops. The U.S. 4th Division, led by Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who we will talk about shortly, was an excellent formation that put 9 good infantry battalions in the beach at the first wave. Allied leaders were hesitant to conduct this operation, fearing that the failure could cost them the war. They wanted to get ahead and stuck to the plan, which the troops were able to pull it off successfully. There were around 20,000 infantry troops landed and suffered less than 300 casualties. Meanwhile, the Allied airborne troops numbered 13,000 troops and suffered 2,499 casualties. Now we're going to get on to Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. at the age of 56 made the choice to join the 8th Infantry Regiment of the 4th Division in their attack on Utah Beach. He acted as the division's deputy commander along with Captain Leonard Sheridan, I believe that's how you pronounce his name,
A little bit louder,
about
Jerry.
the USS Baronet. He asked the superior officers to let him join in the first wave of the attack on Normandy, saying, quote, "I personally know both officers and men of these advanced units and believe that it will be steady for them to know that I am with them." Roosevelt's soldiers would be the first on the seaborne forces on the fight on the day after landing in the first wave. They would be supported by amphibious tanks and break through the seawall before securing vital causeways leading off Utah Beach. Roosevelt and his soldiers began to board their landing crafts at 4:05 a.m. on June 4th, 1944. They were 15 miles off the coast of France at 6:24 a.m. Roosevelt saw the first signs of air assault on the Normandy coastlines as, quote, "blaze of light, clouds of dust." There was so much smoke along the beach that Roosevelt and his men lost sight of the seashore and landmarks that were meant to guide them. As they got closer and smoke cleared, the beach appeared as quote, "a long stretch of sand studded with wire and obstacles." According to Roosevelt, shortly after arrival on the beach, he realized that the entire 8th Infantry first wave had landed in the wrong place. Together with his aide, Lieutenant Marcus Stevenson, they set up the first command post and radio communication in the ruins of a building. Later on, during the fight, Roosevelt was issuing orders and getting men off the beach and further inland. He risked his life and received only a scratch on his hand. When the commander of the 4th Infantry Division saw him at the beach, he was surprised to see him that he was still alive. Roosevelt had proven not only that he could keep up with his younger soldiers. At the age of 56, but that he could command and organize them in the midst of chaos. Within a short time, the Germans were overwhelmed not only by the initial attack from the air and sea, but also the force of the actual assault. Throughout the start of the battle, many Allied soldiers fell, causing the Germans to believe that they had achieved victory on the beach. Later on that afternoon, Allied forces were able to gaining solid ground and started to push German soldiers back. This computed with the fact that Germans had not called for reinforcements, gave the Allies the advantage that they needed to be able to bring additional forces into the fight. Now to the question at the beginning, was Utah Beach really worth capturing for the Americans? The option can be given that yes, it was worth capturing. After water landings on Utah Beach, the American Allies were able to isolate the capture of the port of Cherbourg. They began to move on June 10th towards the city and were able to reach the coast by the 18th. The Americans were able to continuously hit the Germans, who were attempting to hold on to the city with no hope of reinforcements. Being cut off some accurate information caused confusion among the defensive forces, which only allowed the Americans to bring in newly arrived soldiers pushing towards Cherbourg. On the third week of June, the American forces were able to drive into the city, with the fighting ending on June 30th. The capture of Cherbourg meant that the Allies could not be driven to the sea again by the Germans. The capture of the port city allowed the Allied front to gain a strong foothold of the coastline of Normandy and push their way further inland. Utah Beach will forever be known as one of the most important landing sites of the American Allied forces, and those who perished on the Golden Stand that day will live in history of World War II. There's a lot of times I couldn't see.
Just a comment, I really enjoyed the phrasing, perish on the golden sands. Ancient.
Okay, so I have a remark in the question. So I really like how you started with the question and answered at the end. I mean, really interesting, but you mentioned they landed in the wrong place.
Yes, they landed about a mile
and a half too far down.
Yes, west.
Oh, I was going to ask you how far away they landed from where they're supposed to land.
Yeah, 1.5 miles westward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're going to go down there next to where they were supposed to land, because that's where the 2nd French Armored Division actually came ashore on the 1st of August. So we'll go down and see the place where they're supposed to land. Obviously, there were opponents here. We saw one bunker back there. There's another one out here. There's one under the museum. This was a strong point. This was Widerstands Nest 10. And so it was defended. It was not as heavily defended as the one down at St. Martin de Varville, which is where they're supposed to land. We'll see the bunkers down there unless it's pouring rain when we get down there, and you can get an idea. What happened to Teddy Roosevelt? Do you remember?
I believe he returned, I believe.
Teddy, 56 years old, had arthritis, had been wounded in the First World War, landed, came ashore with a cane in one hand and a pistol in the other, saying that was all the weapons he needed to deal with the Germans. About 3 weeks later, he had dinner with his son named Quentin. He also had a brother named Quentin who died in the First World War, who was buried next to him in the cemetery at Omaha Beach. He had dinner with Quentin, who, to my knowledge, that pair is the only father-son team to land in the first wave on D-Day. After they had dinner, Quentin went back to his unit off Omaha Beach, and Teddy had a heart attack and died. Here just inland from Utah Beach, but he died of natural causes. He died of a heart attack. He had had heart trouble for some time. People speculate that he was the sort of Viking warrior, that he wanted to die in combat, and he knew he wasn't going to make it too much longer, and that's why he pushed Ray Barton so hard to let him land in the first wave. Barton said, "You're too valuable to land in the first wave." And Teddy said, "You mean because I'm a president's son?" And that's what it boiled down to. They didn't want the president's son to get killed in the first wave. And I think maybe he did, which is a little ironic. He was nominated initially for the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that took place here. Omar Bradley, when asked later in the war, what's the bravest thing you've ever seen in the course of all your time in the Army? And his immediate response was Teddy Roosevelt on Utah Beach. Roosevelt came up to the top of the dunes where we were when we were up at the Navy Memorial, and is walking back and forth up and down the dunes with his pistol in one hand and his cane in the other, telling jokes and reciting poetry and directing traffic off the beach. He had a decision to make. It's not apparent from, oh, they landed a mile and a half away from where they're supposed to. But if you're in charge of that first wave and you land here, suppose the second wave lands where they're supposed to. Are they going to land down there? What's going to go on? And so his choice was, do we press inland from here? There is a causeway here, the one we drove across. The one they were supposed to land on is further up. Do you have the picture?
Yes.
Yeah, you can. They're supposed to have landed up here and gone inland over this causeway. In fact, they landed down here, and he came up on top of the dunes, he looked at it, he saw there's a causeway, and his really famous quote is, we'll start the war from here. Let's get inland. And he then spent the rest of the morning directing soldiers off the beach, across the causeway and into the interior, so they were able to take advantage of their landing here and really capitalize on it. His other choice, which would not have been irrational, is to say, hustle up, we got to get a mile and a half up the beach to where we're supposed to be, and then we'll go inland from there. Had he done that, who knows what would have happened? I mean, it's absolutely unknowable. This is Teddy Roosevelt Jr. and his Jeep, his trusty Jeep known as Rough Rider. He don't know where he got that. And this is a picture of Navy demolition engineers dismantling things that are called Goliaths. These gizmos are remote controlled bombs. Each one of them was packed with TNT, and they were controlled by a wire 600 meters long. And so a guy could sit back in a bunker with his video game, or whatever it was, and maneuver this thing and hit a button and blow it up.
early
And so the idea was to run this out into the middle of the Allies and then blow it up. None of them worked. One of the things that the shelling did was cut all the wires. And so none of those worked. But they tried. And so that's... more questions for Jerry? Okay. We can go on in. Let's check and see.
Good job, Jerry. Yep, good job, Jerry.